So I've been lucky enough to try out the Fujifilm X-T4 for the last couple of weeks. Massive thank you to Fujifilm for lending me the camera and the lens for the last couple of weeks so that I could try it out. This video isn't sponsored by them, they don't get to see it before it's uploaded. They just lent me the lens and the camera for a couple of weeks to try it out and share with all of you. So one of the first things I noticed when I was trying out the X-T4 was the fact that the body is so much smaller, and that is thanks to its APS-C sized sensor, and that's potentially the biggest difference between that and my Sony a7 Mark IV. The body size being smaller makes it much more compact, easy to carry around, much lighter to use. However, it does mean that things like the grip are a lot shallower, and I do think it's less comfortable to hold. However, that does balance out because the body is so much smaller, it's lighter, you don't need so much grip to hold the weight. One thing Fujifilm cameras are notorious for are lots of dials, a very manual experience, and that is no different with the X-T4. There are 3 dials on the top, one to adjust your ISO, one to adjust your shutter speed, and one to adjust your exposure compensation. They're fundamental for the use of the camera, and it is a completely different experience when you're using it. Underneath those 2 main dials you have a still and movie switch. That's great because this camera does record really great video as well as take photos. And then underneath the ISO switch you have your different mode switches for photography, your single shot, your continuous shooting, continuous high, continuous low, HDR and all that kind of thing. The camera also features a flip LCD screen, which is great for filming yourself. Like I mentioned, this camera doesn't just shoot great photos, it takes great video. So this is really helpful for when you're vlogging or just filming yourself in general. So one of my favorite things about this X-T4 is the stabilization. It is so impressive. It's so much better than the stabilization on my Sony a7 IV, and that is due to that smaller sensor size. It allows them to put more image stabilization into the body of the camera, and that allows you to really reduce your shutter speed when it comes to taking photos and just have much more stable footage when you're shooting handheld. It has the option for just optical stabilization, which doesn't bring you a crop, as well as adding on digital stabilization, which brings in a small crop but allows you to have even more stable footage. The stabilization on this camera really is impressive, and it's one of my favorite things about it. When it comes to autofocus on the X-T4, the autofocus system is very quick and very accurate. I haven't really had many faults. There's a couple moments where I have missed focus or it's taken a little bit longer to focus than I potentially would have liked. There's a number of tracking modes for photos which work really well. Unfortunately, they haven't carried them over to the video modes. That's something I would have liked to see because that could be really helpful, especially when you're filming fast-moving objects. However, overall, I'd say it's a really solid system. It does work in a different way to the Sony systems, and I wouldn't say it's quite as good as them. I think it misses focus a little bit more than them, but overall it's a consistent and accurate system that definitely gets the job done. We're driving cars on a Mars tonight. We're blasting off to the stars tonight. Okay, so let's talk about the photos with the X-T4. I've been super happy with taking photos on this camera. I've been really impressed by the results. They're high quality, they're sharp, they're accurate. The autofocus system and the stabilization massively helps with that. I found when I'm taking my photos, I'm able to go down to a much slower shutter speed than I can do on other cameras because of how good the stabilization is. That allows me to combat the effect of having less light coming into the sensor without increasing my ISO excessively so that I still get high quality, low grain photos. I've also really enjoyed testing out the film simulation modes. There's a bunch of different modes in there you can whack on. You can remove it when you put it into Lightroom, and then you can just edit your photos as normal. So it's kind of like a temporary filter that allows you to see what kind of thing you could do. It's one of those features that differentiates the Fujifilm cameras, and I think it's a really fun one to try out. Taking photos on the X-T4 is definitely a slower and more kind of controlled process. Changing the settings on the dials is a slower process compared to just using those infinite dials, or however I'm calling them. However, I think it can make you think a little bit more about your photography as you're taking it. We're so used to just taking photos super quickly now, snapping tons of photos away, and then kind of not really thinking about our compositions and potentially not taking photos as well as we could do. This slows you down, it allows you that time to think about your compositions. Potentially, it could lead you to missing shots if you couldn't quite get your settings in the right place, but I think with practice you could definitely get used to it. Overall, taking photos on this camera is an absolute joy and it's incredibly satisfying. I'm really pleased with the results and I'd actually love to continue taking more photos on this camera. Let's talk about shooting video on the Fujifilm X-T4, and this was one of the things I was most excited about when I got my hands on this camera because the video specs are incredibly impressive. You can shoot up to 4K 60 frames per second and 240 frames per second in HD, and the quality of the video is really, really good. When it comes to shooting 4K 60, it only comes with a very slight crop. It's a 1.18 times crop, which is a lot smaller than the crop on the Sony a7 Mark IV. The 4K isn't quite of the same quality as those full frame cameras, but I've got to say I've been really impressed. My entire Sony a7 IV review was filmed on the X-T4. If you're interested in checking out that footage, go ahead and watch that whole video and you'll be able to see what this thing can do. One of the things that definitely stood out to me when I was recording video on this camera was the availability of different frame rates. Not only can you choose from the standard frame rates like 24 frames per second, you can also choose different frame rates in between, like your 23.98, your 24, 25 frames per second, as well as 30, 29.97. That allows you so much flexibility and allows you to fine-tune your experience so that you can choose the frame rate exactly for your videos. You can choose to shoot your video in up to 10-bit 420, which allows you tons of flexibility when it comes to your color grading. I've really enjoyed using the F-log on this camera, and it's quite an easy log to grade. I haven't found too many difficulties with it, and I've been really happy with the results that I get after grading. One thing to know about shooting video on this camera is that it does come with record limits. They vary for different frame rates and resolutions, however, it's just something to keep in mind. It's kind of annoying. I don't really know why camera manufacturers are still doing this. A lot of them have started to get rid of their kind of record limitations. On that note, I haven't had any problems with overheating, even when shooting in high frame rates. I also didn't notice the camera getting excessively hot when I was shooting 4K 60 either. Okay, so my conclusion, my evaluation on the Fujifilm X-T4, I've got to say I've really enjoyed using this camera. It's a very satisfying camera to use. The menu systems are also easy to use. They make sense, they're not complicated. They're easy to navigate, which helps making the experience more satisfying. Having a flip screen is essential for your video, and I've got to say overall it's just a very satisfying camera to use. And the film simulations keep your photography fun and creative, and just it feels very fresh and new. It feels different to taking photos on a Sony or Canon camera. It's been an absolute joy to use this camera, and to be honest, I'm really sad that I've got to send it back. Right, that's it for this video. I hope you did enjoy it. Thank you so much for the support on the channel lately. It's been absolutely incredible. There are more videos on the way using this Fuji camera, including the review of the lens that I got with it. I haven't mentioned too much about that in this video because I'm saving it for that one. It's a really interesting lens, so definitely check out that video when it comes out. Thank you so much for watching, and you will continue to support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.